Um, Welcome, uh, everyone. I think it's a pleasure to have here Pelin and Katya for our seminar. Um, they will be talking about the project that they are doing together. That is a very ongoing hands-on field research that is documenting the impact of the Anthropocene on the Lofoten Islands in the very, very north of Norway. It's a kind of a magical place, I think. Focusing around food infrastructures. Pelin, she's a sociologist and art historian based in Turkey, and she's truly one of the most multidisciplinary people that I know, kind of moving very smoothly between art and design and the social sciences. And Katya, she's a Danish conceptual artist and currently a professor at the Lofoten Film and Art Academy. Her work is focusing around social imaginaries and the construction of social imaginaries. The seminar itself is part of a series of seminars that we are putting together as part of the Creatures project. Creatures is looking at how specifically creative practices can contribute towards socially and environmentally sustainable transformation towards sustainable futures. And it starts from the principle that creative practices and the arts are very powerful and they have a very large impact, but it's also something that is very fragmented and understudied, and it's very hard to talk about it in a way that it is not instrumentalizing. So I think what we are trying to do is to kind of identify in which ways creative practices do make an influence in a positive influence in the world, and try to articulate it in a way that could be useful and relevant for people from outside the creative sector, but then without kind of sacrificing the complexity and the intentions of the creators themselves. So this is why we invite, as part of the seminar series, we invite either researchers or practitioners that are working on very similar topics. And obviously, I think the idea of resilience and food infrastructure is something that some of the creative productions that we are working on are also touching upon. And this is how I think your work might potentially be extremely relevant for the topics that we're looking on. Plus, we have some particular interest on the issue of entanglement, so I'm very curious to hear more about that. The session will have a very simple structure where Pelin and Katya will present their work for the first half an hour, and then we will have an open discussion at the end. So thank you, Pelin, thank you, Katya, for joining us, and thanks to everyone for joining the seminar. So I give the word to you.
Thank you, Christina. I think first of all, Pelin and I want to say thank you so much for inviting us. This is a very, very exciting context to be talking in. And as we just mentioned before, we haven't really presented resilient infrastructure. We've been discussing it in the framework of IASPIS, and then of course at the school and with different colleagues. But it's, as you also said, it's an ongoing hands-on project. So this is a kind of introduction where we are also trying to shape a story. And I saw that some of the guests listening in are actually some of the students who joined us back then. So I hope that they will speak up. I saw some of you there. So feel free to speak up if you find that we're sort of misrepresenting, or just if you want to add something. Let's go to the first slide. My name is Katya Sander, by the way. Pelin is taking care of the slides right now. Pelin Tan.
Hi.
There's Pelin. Thank you, Pelin. This is Kabelvag. This is a small town in the Lofoten Islands, northern Norway. It's above the Arctic Circle, and there's about 2,000 people living there. Sometimes I hear the number 2,500. It shifts a little bit, but it's a kind of small town where, of course, people go to other places to work and come back. So in some ways, it's a sleeping town, but it also has two bars. It has a supermarket. There's a little harbor. So it has a little bit of its own infrastructure. And part of this town is our school. which is a small film school, film and art school. If you want to go to the next, yeah, exactly. So this is an image of the school, the gray building. It's a small film and art school. It came out from a kind of pre-college education, and now it's the BA program. So let's just stay with this image for a moment. I didn't want to show images of students because I think that's not a good idea. So it looks a bit empty. But the gray building on your left hand is the school, and we have approximately, when we're full capacity, we have up to 60 students over 3 years, so 20 in each year. But normally we take in 10 to 15 each year. And right now we're actually missing a year. So right now there's only less than 20 students there. This is a small school, but in that town, it actually has quite an influence, and it has there's a close collaboration between the school and people living in the town, and also the surroundings. So a lot of people on Lofoten Islands know about the school, and it's very easy to interact with people. It's very direct because it's a non-urban area, so there's a much more open and helpful attitude between people in the way that we know from countrysides around the world, basically, right? That you're more depending on each other simply. So of course you listen to each other and help each other in different ways than you do in a typical big city. What's important to know about the school is it's a film and art program, which means it's actually just one program where we teach young filmmakers through methodologies taken very much from visual arts. So it's a little bit a different way of teaching filmmakers than normally. Normally, when you go to a film school, you learn how to operate a camera, you learn how to make sound, you learn how to write a script, etc., etc. Here we're using the methodologies from visual arts, which are much more about having choosing a medium that fits to your project in a certain way, right? Or developing projects together with developing the forms and formats. So this is how we work with moving images, and it's very different compared to other film schools. And one of the things we put a lot of attention to is that it's not just a question of being able to shape a media and tell a story. There's also always the question of what story you want to tell. So we try to engage the students in different ways of understanding research, understanding what stories are around, not only your own stories, but people around you, places around you, landscapes around you. What kinds of stories are they carrying? And we do that by introducing different kinds of ways to interact and figure out what stories can be. So in a way, resilient infrastructure is embedded or in the framework of this school. The school invited Pelin Tan as an associate research professor. And Pelin and I immediately decided that we were going to really focus on this idea of site specificity, and then this idea of research as the point of departure out and find examples, but rather that you start up by opening up to the surroundings, people and landscapes and infrastructures around you, and just follow them and see what happens, see what stories turn up, see what is told. And so this was sort of the point of departure for resilient infrastructure. Just to say a little bit about the pedagogics, the pedagogics at the school is like many art schools, it's sort of a student centered learning situation, student-centered teaching it's called, which is based on the idea of the students being co-creators of their own learning and their own learning environments. So the students have a large amount of input on how we make the syllabus. They bring their own interests to the table, and we try to shape discussions and input around that. So really every semester and every year is changing depending on what student group is there. And part of being a teacher here is also being able to respond to very different kinds of interests. So this particular year, we had a bunch of students who were very interested in this way of working. So that's also part of what motivates and what creates these kinds of hubs. We call it a research hub, because it's a framework for research where we share and discuss together. But it's not necessarily that we have a specific aim. We don't know what the outcome is going to be. What's important to say, my last point here, Pelin, and then you take over, is that normally in a BA program, you don't really teach research. It's not part of sort of normal university syllabus. So it's a little bit interesting that what we decided to do was to say, to insist on a kind of non-progressional idea of education, to say it's not like you have to do course 1 before you do course 2, and then you have to pass course 2 before you have access to course 3. Instead, we wanted to open up the idea of artistic research from day 1. So basically, when people arrive to begin their bachelor studies, they are introduced to a large amount of things, and one of these things is this idea of artistic research, and also sociological or architectural or just research as such. And we wanted to implement that very early on, and not really say that you have to wait before you can do research. You have to make your BA, and then you have to do your MA, and then you have to enter into a PhD program, etc., etc. So this is part of the point of resilient infrastructure, is also to make it available not only for students, but actually also people who are not students at the school. We had a bunch of people joining us who were just curious, who were not students at the school. That's the idea, is to open up the framework also in terms of of asking the question, who is authorizing the knowledge we call research? I'll get back to that, and I'm sure Pelin will get back to that too. Okay, Pelin, that was my introduction.
Yeah.
This is the school, and this is actually the view. Oh, that's okay. The view from the office. Now, Pelin, go ahead.
This is the view from the office here, isn't it? Yeah, here.
Yeah.
And this is the school. I'll just follow up with after Katya's introduction of the school, just to little bit having an overview where this where the school is, where this little former fisher town is, where the island is, where Norway is. I mean, the whole scaling. It's very important to understand the scale is not physical scale only. It's also a conceptual scale, I think. And this is very important to understand how we approach research nowadays. There is two things. One thing about research is there is an ongoing knowledge and methodology discussion in the social science in the last 25 years, I would say. And this is about methodological discussion between disciplinaries, and also opening up the conservatism between disciplines, and is not also an academic and research question, those discussion, but is also how the social cases and social events in our societies are pushing us, I mean, researcher, academic, teacher, artist, and so on, to really witnessing and sharing the effect of social transformation in our society. I would say that shortly, other way around, the knowledge that we are producing in the 21st century is the singular knowledge is not enough to understand what is going on around us in the world, in our cities, in our towns, in our rural places, in our world. So this is one thing that is an ongoing discussion, especially in social science, sociology, anthropology, and so on and so on. And secondly, concerning research, for our case, is too very important to understand how artistic research, which was bit denied by the social sciences in the last century, is now a very important an approach. Not that the artist is putting her own identity into research, not that, but how artists and artist collectives are proceeding different kind of multiple methodologies in understanding epistemological and ontological question in the world, in the nature, in the city, whatever case we are in. So this is two things that we are considering when we discuss about research. I mean, I think we are all in a kind of a turning point in these years that we are discussing more and more such topics. And of course, it has to do very much with institutional background, institutional infrastructure. I would say that such a research unit is not possible to establish to every institution. I mean, the institution has to be really flexible to host such thing, and and in our case is not only, of course, proceeding artistic research, but also trying to create a pedagogy for artists, for the students who can be part of it in shaping it, but at the same time really showing, contributing their practice with how to do research, what to do and in what way, and so on. This is one thing, that the pedagogy question of research and methods comes together. But then there is this physical really condition that Kabelvag, which I'm from Turkey, from the blue point that you see me there. And I used to work a lot what they call, I'm against that, but they call it the global south. I work a lot in Palestine, in Beirut, in Athens, in Greece, and in Mediterranean. And somehow I'm more into this global south discussion. This global south is very much like an urbanism term. It's very also critically it's criticized also because it divides the north, the global north, from the global south, and this dualistic structure is being a little bit criticized, being very 20th century understanding in social science, in urbanism especially, or urban sociology. I would call it translocal, trans south, or trans north, or something like that. But there is a here in the second map where Kapelweg is, we were trying to understand this so small local place, which is seems to be very lonely town, which is totally for us one of the, I mean, I think the center, conceptually, um, of the network of Anthropocene in a planetary level. We will come back why we understood. We are approaching like that, and how in our research it came like that. Um, I will come back about that. But when we were choosing to focus on the food infrastructure, for us, food ingredients, the logistic of food production, um, and during our research was we were believing with Katya that this is a kind of a specific network in geographies, in territories, that connects cities and other kind of geographies through production of the ingredients, the labor around the spaces of production, like salmon fish farm, for example. And secondly, the new understanding of borders, physical borders. For example, how in such case, through seaweed production, Kapelweg and China is connected. That is unimaginable normally. But how those logistics are, um, how they are sharing the know-how together. And then also the capitalist circulation of goods like salmon fish or seaweed and so on, Chinese tourism in Norway, and the situation of oceans, the climate warming on the north, and how it is affects the north route from Scandinavia to Russia to China, and how it is affecting also, consequently, the line of the internet cables under the oceans. I mean, we were going into different scales, and we were trying to map how those logistic infrastructures of food and ingredients are really has a planetary network. There are a few things when we come and think about this island, Lofoten Island and Kabelvag. I mean, one one layer is the oceans, and its relation to climate warming, climate change, and climate justice, and being an island and how it is connected to the main island, and how food logistic has a role in that. And the whole fish farms on the ocean, the whole labor around that. I mean, how many people are working, female fish producers, mongers, fishmongers, the gender relation, the gender issue related to that, immigrants, refugees. There are refugees in the islands from Afghanistan, from Syria, and so on. So there are, I mean, this is a small island, but is scaling socially and physically many topics and concepts. Just want to say a little bit about resilience. This is something related. We were thinking food infrastructure as resilient infrastructure, either food produced through agroecological way, or into very non-ecological way. For example, the salmon fish farms. How this whole infrastructure creates a resilience, and what is the level of this resilience. This is interesting for us to search. And secondly, Christina was talking that we will talk more about entanglement. This this concept is we are borrowing from Karim Barat, the physician philosopher who wrote about the concept of entanglement, that she's borrowing from physics, quantum phenomenology. And this was also important for us to understand in critically thinking about what is really thing outside of us, in the outer worlds, in nature, in things, in our research, how we are understanding the formation of becoming of things, and how it is related, because entanglement somehow, Karim Barat says, doesn't deny the duality of thing and subjectivity, but she's offering, borrowing from quantum physics, a definition of a becoming ontology that would, for example, we read a lot from maybe Deleuzian philosophy, that how things are continuously shaping each other when they're becoming, and how knowledge and things are entangled in that way, and how we can understand this whole formation in relation. So that is also something that, I mean, it looks very difficult, but at the same time, in research, it little bit warns us from simplistic, singular, objective science making. So really trying to understand with different kind of multiple scales, and harms and solidarity, how things are related to each other. Coming back to Lofoten Island, we choose first little production spaces like fish, seaweed, and cheese, and even wool, small manufacturers, small family farms, small workshops. And first, we did simple ethnographical site visits, and meeting them and interviewing them and spending time with them in order to understand how those each entities are functioning in this island. For us was very interesting to hear that, for example, a producer, an organic cheese producer in Lofoten, how they are selling the cheese to crews, to big ships who are mainly carrying Chinese tourists up to north, passing from Bergen to Lofoten, and how this daily cycle of logistic of producing and shipping and selling the cheese makes a kind of a new gastronomical route also. This was very interesting to learn, and then also how those little families in production trying to sustain in the local and global market. We learned that, for example, salmon farms production 90% is sold outside of Norway. And then the seaweed producer workshops, people, they are really in contact with Chinese producers, and they're buying to their seaweed crash machines from China, and they visiting and coming back. And this was really interesting, at least for me, to understand and learn that in such a small city and town, village, and island is totally globally connected, and shaping even the taste, the gastronomy, and know-how practices in a planetary way. the one thing for us, I think, is important, how workers and laborers are organized around this logistic. This was very important. You see in the picture, fresh fish from the sea. This is not farm fish. This is from the sea in certain, like it was February, in certain season, and all those. This is a fishmonger place in the island, and mostly women are cleaning, organizing, and selling those fishes. And field research. This was also another discussion: how we do field, how will we do research in the site, by coming outside, meeting the people, trying to understand in a short visit, how this field research can be very fulfilling to really understand what is going on, but at the same time critically very touristic visit also, and how we can really go beyond that issue. Field research problematic is an ongoing issue in anthropology, ethnography, and sociology. Practical sociology research is a long discussion, and this could be also, I mean, this was an issue to discuss, and how in research on Anthropocene, how we should really approach the field, and what kind of methods and participatory practices, action research methodologies should we use. This was also one discussion we had. And logistic, it's an important way to understand Anthropocene era. And this is, you all know, I think, there's a nice book by Anna Singh, that she is a research about this mushroom from through planetary capitalistic chain, that how this mushroom is really following through this mushroom. Really, she's trying to understand the whole scale of capitalism from US to Japan. I think this is all of us. I think many people are reading, who study and research Anthropocene conceptually and in a practical research. And maybe you are following Anna Singh's team, Feral Atlas, that we are thinking it's very interesting how theoretically and practically following a non-human elements like seaweeds and other kind of cheese, salmon, and other kind of non-human elements can give us a very much information about layers of scales of capitalist dissemination and circulation. This is also something we found very important, inspiring of Anna Singh's readings and methodology, let's say ethnographical, I mean, contemporary ethnography methodology of Anthropocene studies. But of course, we are still learning. We were very lucky during our workshop. We came across ocean scientists who were doing a conference. This was also very interesting. Two things. One, we learned many things about ocean and what is going around the Lofoten Islands, the sea, the stream, ocean streams, the animals, the whales, and this was a kind of a conference that partially was an entrepreneur little workshop firm, that they are producing tracking system to check and follow the whales and streams. And this was very interesting, that a kind of a knowledge which is very important for Anthropocene research, but artistically that we don't know so much, because it's totally kind of in a science, other science discipline, those knowledge. But it was very interesting to be parts listening this workshop and conferences. And those ocean scientists, they were also surprised that many artists came to their conference and they couldn't understand what would be the relation between both. We will come back to that, but this was really like challenging to learn about biology of ocean and the stream, what was going on in the north. We always think that the south, in the urban studies, in sociology, there's an ongoing long theory about that since the 70s, that the south is very extracted, it's very colonized, This is the kind of a colonial theory, social science knowledge. But for me, it was very interesting to see during the workshop that how the North is very much extracted and colonized by Russian, by Chinese, by many kind of other nation through digital infrastructural network like internet cable that China wants to reach very quickly as the South Sea is melting. They can put more crews in the South Sea, and they can reach more faster internet cable. So it's this kind of knowledge through digital tourism and goods. There is a kind of leveled colonization and extraction going on in the north. This is one of the picture from the salmon farm, and or interviews with the salmon keepers. This is the workshop Lofoten Blue Harvest. They are producing seaweed, different kind of seaweeds. This machine, the crushing machine, they said they learned. They went to China and they learned and got it from the Chinese seaweed producers and so on. And they are in contact with them. And as you know, seaweed is one of the future superfood. When the society and cities, everything will disappear in the future from post-Anthropocene era. Maybe we will eat only seaweed in the future. I don't know. But this is a food infrastructure of cheese, little producers. It was very important to understand for us how those little agroecology follow family producer are trying to sustain and stay alive in this island. They're selling currently a lot to the crews who are carrying Chinese tourists to the north. This is one of the very small family. This is the young farmers of the family who are really devoted themselves to produce consistent agroecological farm. You see the compost here. You see the mother of him cutting the cheese. Their animals and everything is in consistent with healthy and ingredients and natural ingredients, and they are really radical on that. And of course, when we had this meeting, we also discussed it's not about testing and having good cheese. It's not also about that. It is also about solidarity. How different kind of practitioners like farmers, artists, and so on, can come together and be in solidarity to sustain such a small scale production spaces. Of course, this was in 2018, before COVID, and you can imagine that after COVID, how it is so important right now. This centers or discussion. We invited Urbano Studio. The Swamp School is an artistic project, was participated in the Architecture Biennial of Venice in the Lithuanian pavilion. Gediminas and Urbanos, they are together since producing long years practice. They are based in the MIT in the Art and Culture Technology program in the architecture faculty as a kind of a specific master program, where I did my postdoc there too. This is how I know them 10 years ago. But the Swamp School was focusing on the metaphorically, also physically on swamp. And this was a good discussion also, how, or in one level, how artistic methodology can be developed, how the Swamp School is produced. I mean, they have a website we can send later, but how they're producing their methodology with different kind of scientific people and artistic and architectural practices, but also how to think about swamp contra soil, and how swamp has so many meaning, like colonial meaning, at the same time bio ecological environment that many non-human exist, and is a kind of a ecosystem swamp. So we invited Swamp School for 1 day, 2 day, I think it was 2-3 days. Katya can correct me, but it was. We thought that it's important for our students to really see and meet them and share our practices. How Swamp School is working as a artistic practice, but also as a independent pedagogical platform. A radical pedagogy is very important thinking in radical artistic methodology together. I would say that such research aim and discussion and also such artistic practice cannot be done in a very typical art academy or in a very typical sociology, social science department. This is what I'm personally very sure about. That it's so difficult. These institutions are so conservative, including art academies. So this is why it's important to really experiment with such research unit in experimental schools. I think it works very well. Maybe Katya will we are finishing our half an hour talk. I will handle to Katya with the mind map.
Yeah.
She will say something and then I think we are almost done.
So back to the mind map, yeah. Thanks, Pelin. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's being brought up here, and I think I just want to tell people, write or ask us your questions afterwards, right? Because we're just putting it all out there now. I think one thing that's interesting is, for example, this was a mind map which we did during one of our presentations, and it was just one of it was sort of the first presentation, and we decided to get the mind map while we talk and while the audience asks us questions and we tell anecdotes, etc., etc. So what you see is a totally messy mind map. It's not a mind map that's trying to make I hope my sound is good. I'm going to take off my camera, actually. I think that'll make my sound better. So the mind map is not trying to make things more easy to understand. You have to sort of follow specific lines, right? And I think this is one thing that we're really taking from the notion of entanglement that Christine said she was very curious about. And we're trying to say, okay, so normally when there's knowledge about something, that knowledge is clarifying, right? Now you know this for sure. You can rest on that knowledge. It's good. It's solid. It's proven. It's, let's call it objective or whatever. And you often see sort of diagrams. You see maps. You see this kind of the imagery that is connected to this idea of solid knowledge is always with clear lines. And what's important for us is to understand that knowledge is not necessarily something that can be easily delineated. It cannot be easily said, this is where I know and this is where I don't know, and there's a clear line between. It's a fuzzy zone. Let's call it a fuzzy zone instead, right? So instead of all these clear diagrams or clear maps or clear graphs or statistics or whatever, where you read a number and then you're sure because that's been counted, we have to understand knowledge in a different way. That knowledge is always also depending on a lot of other circumstances that we are not counting into it right now, right? Because we might not know about it actually. So there's something where we're trying to ask, and we're trying to invite the students also to ask how to create narratives through these kinds of knowledges without pretending everything to be clear. Like how to that's why we're using this idea of site visits and storytelling a little bit inspired by Benjamin as a kind of methodology for the moving image part of this kind of research, is because we say we go out to territories where we think we know certain things, but the way that knowledge is, it's really fuzzy in the edges. We know it to a certain extent, but we don't know really how far we know it, etc., etc. So to understand that fuzziness, we're trying to make lines of stories, narrations, instead of maps, right? I hope that makes sense. You can imagine that you have a big area and you don't know everything there, but you move through it and you make a line through your moving, right? In that sense. So we're trying to understand the idea of storytelling as a way of going through areas that you don't necessarily know fully. And that is as a counter to this idea that you have to know everything fully before you can tell it, right? So this idea that knowledge has to be authorized and then you can sort of retell it in that sense. So we use the idea of stories instead. And this was just presenting one presentation where the first time we did resilient infrastructure, we had 2 weeks, and after and 1 week of site visits, and we went out everywhere, and the students were then saying, well, how can we present this? We went into so many places, but we haven't really digested. We don't know what we learned. How can we present it? And we decided to to do a kind of anecdote, a collection of anecdotes. So everybody told anecdotes about what they thought about what they had seen, but not trying to make it into one, to put the anecdotes into one big map where everything makes sense, right? To leave it so that there is gaps in between where we don't really know how things are connected. And those are the anecdotes, those are the notes from the anecdotes. And as you can see, there's all kinds of lines that are slowly taking place. So this was, of course, a mind map is always, always looks like something that tries to clarify, but we really tried to follow the mind map, or to create a mind map that doesn't clarify. It just gives you things to talk about and to consider relations between. If you move on, Pelin, to the next, yeah. I think this is one of our last images. It was just to give an example that some of the research we made, the students also took it back into the school physically. They're also co-creators of their own learning environment. And this was a few of the students who decided to, especially one who decided to build up these greenhouses and try to cultivate food, both for himself and for the school, for the students, for cooking together. And this is, of course, in the Arctic areas. It's not so unusual to have a greenhouse. I mean, people do have greenhouses up there, but what was nice was that it was taken into the learning space of the school, and it was part of school. As you can see, there's a small terrace where everybody meets. There's one person standing here. So everybody kept an eye on the food that was being made there, and if the plants were doing well or not, etc., etc. And this is kind of where we thought, this is what's interesting, like growing cabbage. If you go one down, Pelin, one more image down. Yeah, growing cabbage in winter. Actually, it's interesting. This kind of cabbage is one of the few kinds of cabbages that will survive in snow and still grow in snow. And growing food in the winter is it's just interesting to take that into the school and to understand that part of your own learning environment is conditioned. It's conditioned by so many different factors. And to grow food is not necessarily an art project. It's not necessarily a film, but it's part of your everyday life as a student. And so those were the kinds of things that we were trying to sort of weave into the situation, the living situation of the students. I think, yeah, I think I should probably stop here so that we have a little bit of space for questions. Let's see if people have things they want to ask.
Thank you. Thank you, Pelin and Katya. I was wondering, in the beginning of the session, you said that some of your students were here. So maybe I would like to start by asking them, or some of them, if they have any feedback, and also maybe share their own experience of this research project, and how it compared to other like educational experiences that they had. Is anyone here that would like to talk?
You never know if they stayed.
I saw Hamid, but
Yeah,
I don't know where he went.
I saw Hamid too, but maybe he's not there. Well, maybe he left. Maybe he was bored. Johanna, were you there?
No, I missed it, unfortunately. I missed the word. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Oh, well.
Connected by something, or he just left because he was bored.
Great. Someone else maybe has a question, or?
Yeah, maybe just a related question to the students issue. It really sounds super fascinating how you were describing the program, the BA program at the beginning of the talk. So I just wanted to ask, like, how many students are there actually, or, you know, I'm still trying to imagine how this, how the whole course works. Like, it sounds almost like a dreamy thing that I would want to attend myself. So how many students are there, or how do you run the classes, or do you have a lot of like field work outside in the wild? And yeah.
Do you want to respond? Is this a question for one of the students?
I'm the only one here, I think, now. Yeah. Well,
yeah,
you said that the school can accept 60 students, but when I started, we were 40. So that was like the most students I've experienced. But I think what's important with the studies is that everything is driven through what you want to explore yourself. So you never get assignments, you never get, okay, so you're going to go out and film this. You always decide the focus and the subject and what you're doing and how. So that's how everything is kind of directed through what we're interested in as students. Yeah.
Then maybe as a follow-up on that, like how do you document that, and how do you make it into something that could potentially be useful for other students in the future? So, you know, is there a kind of middle level between the kind of total individual experience that is like very focused around the interest of one specific student, and something that you as educators can take forward and kind of share with future students in other classes? Like how, yeah. How do you document this artistic research process in a way that it can be useful to others in the future?
I think that's a really good question, Christine, because, and it's something Pelin and I are still discussing. Partly it depends on the infrastructure of the institution, right? Do they publish books? Do they have big websites? You know, what kind of, how do they store their research and how do they promote their research in that sense? But partly it also depends on what we think is important here, because if you're a teacher, you know that the real work happens live between people, right? You can give students texts, you can give them this, that, you can give them assignments, they can come back with materials, but the real work is between people and it happens in time, right? So there's a balance here where with resilient infrastructures, we really tried to sort of emphasize the fact that we were doing things together. So instead of Pelin and I going out and doing the research we're interested in as professors and afterwards showing the students the slides, we decided, no, everybody goes out and they get to see us not really knowing, you know, what to ask, or we have certain curiosities and we find out this is not really what's interesting here. It's something completely different, right? So it's also a point that the students, they don't just follow and watch us, but they get to see us in an environment where we also where we're open to find out what is possible to find out here, right? And where the students also have the options of asking questions and being active and having curiosities that comes from their own projects or whatever. So it was really an attempt to not try to shape it so that it very quickly is something you can present again, right? Which is also why, as you said, it's a project that's not really online, because it happens a lot live. And also because we haven't decided yet, how do we do this? You know, the first time we presented it, which we liked a lot, it was storytelling. It was telling anecdotes and showing images between people in a room, right? And now we've had COVID for a while, so we can't meet in rooms and all that. But this was quite an important experience for us, that we went out together and then afterwards we met together and we told each other stories of what we saw and what we thought about it and how we connected it with other things. And this part is not something that you just easily turn into a text and then you publish it, because then you're missing the point. The part of the discussion is really, how does knowledge take shape? How do we know things? What are the formats for knowing, right? That's one of our questions here. And one format is this kind of storytelling. Another format is a text, but you have to sort of consider all of it. And this is a sort of slow negotiation that we're going through. And it also has to do with the resources of a place. You know, it's very expensive for a school to just take a whole class of students and send them out to site visits, paying all tickets, rental cars, ferries, you know, whatever. So there's a huge investment going into that kind of experiment and saying, okay, let's try to do it. Let's just try to send everybody out and follow these two people with their project, and let's see what comes from it. So a lot of what we are digesting and trying to figure out how to realize again pedagogically is really also depending on resources. Do you want to add something, Pelin?
No. Oh, it's yeah. I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Someone else? I see that Jazz and Andrea and Anne are here. They are kind of the creature leaders.
Yeah.
And apparently very inspired by the possibility of being visiting researchers at your school.
Yeah, I see the questions in the chat. Do you accept visiting researchers? Yes, we do. When
I didn't add my voice to that because I thought I was a bit slow off the mark. But yes, we would love, I think, to, depending on when mobility comes back, and mindful of our footprint on the planet. But no, I'm still digesting the idea. But I sort of want to respond to something about the person-centeredness of what you're offering, and really kind of infuse about the way that that manifests, and also then ask a question, if I may, about, with a lot of my work, I also try and allow people to follow their initiative and talk about what they're passionate about. But at the same time, I have another layer of pedagogy, which is about my agenda, about what I think people should know. So the question, I suppose, here is, how far do you have a body, perhaps of procedural or historical or some kind of material that you feel should be accessible to all students, because that's what they will want to know about to do their work well? Or how far is it really just more an evolutionary process?
I think that's a good question. I think Pelin and I are a little bit different in these two. At the school in Kabelvag, there's no syllabus, no courses. Well, we have a lot of courses, but each of them is developed as a response to something, right? And each course can have a syllabus, but it's not like any year has, like, you have to go through this or anything like that. There's no curriculum. It's not clear. When you start, you don't really know what the courses are going to be for the next 3 years, because you are part of creating them and wanting them, wishing for them, researching, finding out who to invite or what topics to explore, etc., etc. So as a teacher, I think you always come with your own luggage, and you're shaped by what you know, what you find interesting. That's super important. But at the same time, I think we were trying to figure out how to let in students, let them further into these processes than normally, right? How to give them access to how we do our research, and how to have them influence us, not only in asking questions where we're thinking, oh, I can use that question, you know, I'll take that, but actually have them shape what the research process is, for me and Pelin also.
Of course, in such topic or in such research, it's also very philosophical. This is, I think, the basic problem in research on Anthropocene. That, of course, it's very dry, also participatory field research, borrowing from contemporary anthropology and ethnographic an artistic participative performative technique, but at the same time is super philosophical, that that connects to the baggage of the history of subjectivity and thing in the Eurocentric knowledge production that has a kind of a linear history. And this is something very clear for me as a Turkish person outside of Europe, and educated in Turkey, not in Europe or in other places, but being, you know, educated with Foucault and so on in the 90s, which was so fashionable that time. And of course, there is a kind of Western philosophical thinking history that we are all sharing, and then also the criticality about post-structuralism, post-colonialism, and decolonial theories right now, inspired by a Latin American researcher who are working on extractive zones and indigenous society communities together, has a different kind of reading baggage, and then, of course, current discussion that combines artistic research with new way of looking, multiple looking to production of capitalism, like Judy Graham, Catherine Gibson work, economical feminist geography since 20 years, or Anna Singh and other kind of Donna Haraway, other kind of Rosa Brotti, a kind of post-humanist researchers, like critical to European knowledge making too, critical to singular colonial histories and so on. And then, combine, I mean, this is all big readings, if you don't come from a sociology background or political science background, it's very difficult to grasp. I mean, I remember in the 90s, I was reading in Turkish Donna Haraway that time, and not so many people were referencing it to her. She was very marginal, her work that time. But now it just bombed, it's just new. People think younger generation sociology students in Turkey, they think that is a new philosopher. Is not. I mean, she was like that there before, but it's just that we are living in a kind of a geological, geopolitical, and climate moment that all this relation between the entanglement of different kind of non-human and human entities we are realizing they have a specific relation to the earth in a planetary level, and then how as a researcher we can grasp that is not so easy. I think in such collective research and collective field research and discussion from our specific point of baggage and view is the only way, I think, in my opinion, as a researcher, to understand research and the process of research in any kind of geography. I mean, if you speak about Palestine, West Bank extraction in West Bank, colonial, it's not so different what is going on in a different way in North, in Scandinavia, for example. I don't say it's same, but I mean, the whole discussion is really shifting in the different territory, and then with different kind of site and theoretical baggage, you come together and shape again the knowledge. I think we are in the moment that research has totally altered its meaning to understand the world in a planetary level. How Chinese Indian refugees, worker laborers are working in Dubai in a construction, and how those construction firms basically most of them run by Turkish architects and Turkish construction companies. I mean, it's so weird to see those relationships between Syria, Dubai, India, and Turkey. Just following the construction market, for example. So I say that it's knowledge is more than ever complex, or it was complex, but with just this Eurocentric view, we were simplifying and putting so much into a dualistic structure before. And now in nowadays, we discuss more with different discipline people together how we understand one epistemological entity with different kind of layers, and its production of its ontology of each layers and how it is connected to each other. I think this is also a main issue right now with trying to, in science too, positivist laboratory science too. It's not only in social science or artistic. If you want to understand the virus corona, I think it has the same problematic. How we should understand virus in a laboratory or in a city. Yeah.
So, I mean, thank you. I'd love to go on. I think that we are probably constrained by time not to, because you've been so fascinating, but we also tend to keep these to time, don't we, Christina? So I'll just thank you for that, and note that there seems to be a whole kind of meta-epistemology here, which you're calling baggage, which I think is so lovely. Sort of this notion of our experience. That is also then something which should be accessible to the students. That's such an interesting way of reframing it. So I've really appreciated listening to your work and definitely recognize resonances, and will now shut up and hand back to Christina.
Well, I think since we are a bit over time, I would like to thank you again for joining us and sharing your work. It's been really lovely to know what you've been doing, and there are obviously so many points of connections with creatures. So thank you so much for being here today.
Christina, thank you for inviting us. It's time we are talking about this research. Due to COVID, we couldn't really continue. Hopefully we will speed up for with our field and theoretical discussion and so on. But we are looking forward for future collaboration. You know, Katya maybe can say a little bit more. That I don't know, Katya. I give
No,
the word
I
to
also
you.
just
Thank you
wanted
very
to.
much.
Yeah, I also just want to say thank you. It was nice. It was Pelin who suggested we present this, and I was like, okay, yeah, let's try. But it has been a bit. There has been a period where we couldn't see each other and we couldn't do research in the way we wanted, right? Because of COVID. So there is a need to figure out how to behave now, how to do it in this kind of situation. So this was a good entry to that.
Great, I'm happy for that.
Thank you.